Did the great thinkers of history always believe the doctrines they so eloquently defended? What if their private thoughts sharply contradicted their public pronouncements? What if a philosophical giant like Immanuel Kant, the champion of reason, harbored secret doubts about the very God he seemed to prove? Immanuel Kant stands as a towering figure in the history of philosophy, renowned for his intricate and rigorous system of thought. He sought to bridge the gap between faith and reason, a quest that defined much of his intellectual life. Within his major works, Kant presented influential arguments for the existence of God, including the moral argument, the cosmological argument, and the teleological argument. Yet, these arguments, while persuasive, were meticulously crafted to operate within the strict confines of reason, leaving some to wonder about the depth of Kant's personal conviction. Now, imagine the existence of rumored, secret diaries or private notes penned by Kant himself, writings that, if genuine, could offer an unfiltered glimpse into his innermost beliefs, unburdened by the constraints of academic rigor and public expectation. But here's the twist. What if these diaries revealed profound doubts about the very existence of God? Such a revelation would challenge the very foundations of Kant's philosophical project, creating a stark conflict between what he argued publicly and what he may have genuinely believed privately. In this video, we will delve into the potential contents of these secret diaries, examining key entries that suggest a hidden struggle between faith and reason within the mind of Kant. We promise to uncover the shocking implications of these private thoughts, exploring their impact on Kant's philosophy, his personal life, and the broader debate about the existence of God. We'll question whether the diaries reveal him grappling with ideas he simply couldn't express in his published works, including his struggles with the problem of evil, his evolving perspectives on organized religion, and his deeply personal quest for meaning in a world seemingly governed by both reason and chaos. Stay with me, for what we are about to uncover casts light on not just Kant, but also on the universal human struggle to reconcile faith and reason, public duty and private beliefs, acceptance and doubt. It's understandable that questioning the beliefs of a philosophical giant like Kant might feel uncomfortable, even sacrilegious to some. Perhaps you've personally grappled with similar questions about faith, reason, and the existence of God. Know that it's okay to doubt. Questioning is an integral part of the process of understanding, of forging your own path toward truth. Exploring these questions is not about disproving or dismissing Kant's philosophy. Rather, it's about gaining a deeper, more nuanced understanding of a complex thinker and the human condition that binds us all. So, let's delve into the secret world of Kant's diaries and explore what they might reveal about his true thoughts on God. Now, let's delve deeper into the core premise of these supposed diaries, that Immanuel Kant privately struggled with the very arguments he so eloquently defended in his published works. Could it be that the man who meticulously constructed a philosophical system to reconcile faith and reason harbored profound doubts about its very foundations? The key to understanding this potential conflict lies in examining Kant's moral argument for the existence of God, a cornerstone of his philosophical edifice. Prepare to question what you thought you knew about Kant, because the revelations within these diaries, if authentic, challenge the very essence of his public persona. Kant's moral argument, in essence, posits that morality necessitates a system of rewards and punishments. This system, in turn, implies the existence of a just God to administer these rewards and punishments. Without such a divine arbiter, Kant argued, the moral order would be rendered meaningless, as virtue would not necessarily be rewarded, and vice would not necessarily be punished. This concept is closely tied to Kant's categorical imperative, the supreme principle of morality that dictates we should act only according to maxims that we could will to become universal laws. The categorical imperative emphasizes duty and reason, suggesting that moral actions are those performed out of a sense of obligation, rather than a desire for personal gain or fear of consequences. But here's the question. Did Kant truly believe that this moral framework was inextricably linked to the existence of God, or did his private thoughts lead him down a different path, one where morality stood on its own, independent of divine decree? The rumored diaries, however, seem to hint at Kant questioning whether morality truly necessitates a divine rewarder. What if, they ponder, virtue should be its own reward, and vice its own punishment, inherent in the very nature of moral or immoral action? Such a notion challenges the foundation of Kant's own system. Imagine an entry where Kant writes, "What if the moral law within is sufficient, without need for a moral lawgiver above? What if the inherent dignity of humanity, our capacity for reason and moral action, provides all the justification we need for a life of virtue?" These private musings suggest a profound shift in perspective, a questioning of the very assumptions that underpinned his public arguments. Think about it. If Kant himself questioned the necessity of God for morality, what does that say about the nature of belief itself? To illustrate this inner turmoil, let's consider some hypothetical diary entries, glimpses into the mind of Kant grappling with these profound questions. Imagine an entry where Kant grapples with the problem of seemingly good people suffering and evil people prospering. He writes of a bitter injustice in the world, a stark contrast to the notion of a divinely ordained moral order. "I see good men struck down by illness, poverty, and despair," he might lament, "while villains thrive, accumulating wealth and power through deceit and cruelty. Where is the justice in this? Where is the hand of God in this apparent chaos?" This entry challenges Kant's public argument that a just God is a necessary postulate of practical reason. But is belief born out of necessity truly belief, or is it merely a construct of reason, a means to an end? In another entry, Kant might question the very motivations behind religious belief. He wonders if people believe in God out of genuine conviction or out of fear of punishment and desire for reward. Do we truly love God for his own sake, he might ponder, or do we simply seek to curry favor with a cosmic benefactor, hoping to secure our place in paradise? This cuts to the very heart of his arguments for a rational faith. The entry might note, if morality is simply a transaction with the divine, a quid pro quo arrangement where we exchange good deeds for eternal bliss, does it truly retain its inherent worth? Is it not merely a sophisticated form of self-interest, cloaked in the guise of piety? Finally, imagine an entry where Kant expresses a longing for empirical proof of God's existence, a yearning that directly contradicts his philosophical stance that God cannot be proven through reason or experience. "I strive to find God through reason," he might write, "but sometimes, I confess, I yearn for a sign, a glimpse beyond the veil, a tangible manifestation of the divine presence." This entry reveals a deeply human desire for tangible evidence of the divine, an urge suppressed in his published works. Is it weakness to desire such proof? He might question. Is it a betrayal of reason to long for something more than abstract arguments and logical deductions? Now, let's analyze the implications of these doubts. If Kant privately questioned his own arguments, does this invalidate his philosophy? Not necessarily. In fact, it humanizes him. It reveals a mind grappling with the same fundamental questions that have plagued humanity for centuries. Did Kant experience a crisis of faith that he felt compelled to suppress for professional or social reasons? Perhaps the intellectual climate of his time demanded a certain level of conformity, and openly expressing such doubts could have jeopardized his career and reputation. These diaries showcase the tension between Kant's rigorous commitment to reason and his deeply human desire for faith. The diaries suggest he kept faith at arm's length, examining it, questioning it, but never fully embracing it with the fervor of a true believer. Think about it. Have you ever felt pressure to conform to beliefs that you privately questioned? Have you ever felt the need to suppress your doubts in order to fit in, to maintain your social standing, or to avoid conflict? How do you reconcile your own doubts with your desire for certainty? The implication of these potential diary entries is profound. It suggests that Kant's philosophical work might have been more of a rigorous intellectual exercise than a genuine expression of unwavering conviction. He constructed a logical framework for belief, but his heart may have remained unconvinced. This raises a fundamental question. Can one truly believe in something that one has proven through reason, or does true belief require a leap of faith, a surrender to something beyond the grasp of logic? But Kant's doubts about God were not limited to philosophical arguments. His diaries also reveal a growing skepticism towards organized religion. But Kant's doubts about God were not limited to philosophical arguments. His diaries also reveal a growing skepticism towards organized religion. Here, a new layer of his internal conflict emerges as he grapples not just with the existence of a divine being, but with the institutions and practices that claim to represent that being. Did Kant see organized religion as a help or hindrance to moral living? Kant held a uniquely nuanced position, respecting the moral teachings of Christianity, particularly the figure of Jesus as a moral exemplar. However, his personal writings, if these diaries are to be believed, increasingly reveal a growing discomfort with religious rituals, dogmas, and hierarchical structures. Dogma, in this context, refers to the established beliefs or doctrines of a religion, often presented as unquestionable truths. Rituals are the prescribed practices and ceremonies, while hierarchy represents the organizational structure with its layers of authority. Kant, a champion of reason, found himself increasingly at odds with aspects of religion that seemed to demand blind faith rather than rational understanding. What fueled this growing skepticism? Let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries, glimpses into Kant's evolving perspective on organized religion. In one entry, Kant critiques the practice of prayer. Do these rote recitations truly represent genuine communication with the divine? He might question. Or are they merely empty rituals, comforting to the supplicant but ultimately ineffectual in influencing the course of events? He wonders if prayers are more about soothing the anxieties of the one praying than impacting the will of God. Is prayer a sincere dialogue with the divine, or merely a psychological exercise, a form of self-soothing dressed in pious language? In another entry, Kant voices concerns about the power and influence wielded by religious authorities. These self-proclaimed intermediaries between God and humanity, he writes, wield immense power over the beliefs and actions of their followers. He fears the potential for manipulation and control, the subtle ways in which religious institutions can exploit faith for their own ends. Is blind faith truly compatible with individual autonomy? He asks, can a person truly be free if their thoughts and actions are dictated by fear of divine retribution or the promise of heavenly reward? What happens when spiritual guidance becomes spiritual coercion? In yet another diary entry, Kant expresses reservations about specific Christian doctrines, such as the concept of original sin. This notion that all humanity is born tainted, inherently flawed, seems incompatible with reason and individual autonomy, he muses. How can we reconcile the idea of a just God with the concept of inherited guilt, a burden placed upon us before we even have the capacity to choose our own actions? The entry reflects his internal struggle, a battle between faith-based tenets and the unyielding demands of rational thought. Can we truly embrace doctrines that defy logic, that demand we suspend our critical faculties in the name of belief? What are the implications of Kant's growing skepticism towards organized religion? Did his views foreshadow the secularization of modern society, where reason and individual autonomy increasingly challenge religious authority? Perhaps these diaries offer a glimpse into the future, a prediction of the decline of religious influence in the face of scientific advancement and Enlightenment ideals. But here's the twist. Despite these private doubts, Kant publicly adhered to religious norms. What motivated this apparent contradiction? Was he simply conforming to societal expectations, fearing the repercussions of openly challenging the established order? Or did he see a pragmatic value in religion, a means of maintaining social cohesion and moral order, even if he personally questioned its foundations? Did he think that most people required religion or could be moral with logical thought? Could Kant have viewed organized religion as a tool to control society? This brings us to a crucial point. If Kant's moral framework did not depend on external authority or even God, then where did he look? What inner compass guided him, independent of both religious dogma and philosophical arguments? This brings us to a crucial point. If Kant's moral framework did not depend on external authority or even God, then where did he look? What inner compass guided him, independent of both religious dogma and philosophical arguments? Despite his potential doubts about God and organized religion, Kant found a firm moral foundation within himself, through the moral law within, also known as the categorical imperative. Did Kant's internal moral compass provide sufficient guidance for living a meaningful life, even in the face of doubt and uncertainty? Let's delve deeper into this moral law within. At its core, Kant's categorical imperative dictates that we should act only according to principles that one could will to become universal laws. What this means is that before acting, we should ask ourselves, could I want everyone to act this way all the time? If the answer is no, then the action is morally wrong. Kant also argued that we should treat humanity always as an end and never merely as a means. In other words, we should respect the inherent dignity of every person and not use them as mere tools to achieve our own goals. It's similar to the Golden Rule, but grounded in reason rather than religious doctrine. Kant derived this moral law from reason itself, independent of divine command or external authority. Think about it. He believed that reason alone could reveal the fundamental principles of morality, regardless of whether God exists or not. This concept promotes individual autonomy and responsibility, placing the burden of moral decision-making squarely on the shoulders of each individual. To truly grasp the weight of this principle, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries. These are not literal translations, but glimpses into Kant's mind, demonstrating his unwavering commitment to his moral law within, even when faced with personal hardship or social pressure. Consider this first entry. Today, I find myself torn between duty and desire. A certain attachment has formed, a connection that stirs feelings I thought long dormant. Yet, this attachment, if pursued, would compromise my principles, would create a situation where I am using another as a means to my own fleeting happiness. The moral law within demands I resist this temptation, even though it brings me profound personal pain. Reason dictates that universalizability must triumph over individual inclination. The sacrifice is great, but the alternative, a life of compromised principles, is unbearable. Imagine the inner turmoil, the clash between personal longing and the unyielding demands of his moral code. Is such a rigid adherence to principles sustainable, or does it demand too much of human nature? Now consider this second entry. The whispers have begun, the criticisms leveled against my defense of an unpopular moral principle. They call me idealistic, detached from the realities of the world. They urge me to compromise, to temper my views for the sake of social harmony. But how can I, in good conscience, abandon a principle I know to be true? Justice demands that we speak out against injustice, even when it is unpopular, even when it brings us scorn. To remain silent in the face of wrongdoing is to become complicit in it. The path of principle is often a lonely one, but it is the only path that leads to true integrity. Isn't it interesting that Kant, a man of such rigorous intellect, also possessed such unwavering moral courage? What gave him the strength to stand against the tide of public opinion? Finally, let's imagine this third entry. Today, I faced a moral dilemma of agonizing complexity. Describe a difficult moral situation where there is no easy answer. Every course of action seemed fraught with potential harm, every choice a compromise of some deeply held value. I retreated to the categorical imperative, seeking guidance in its universal principles. Could I will this action to become a universal law? Would it treat humanity as an end, or merely as a means? Through careful reasoning, through rigorous self-examination, I arrived at a decision, one that I believe aligns with the moral law within, even though it brings with it a heavy burden of responsibility. Think about it, Kant's commitment wasn't about blindly following rules, but about actively engaging in moral reasoning, applying universal principles to the messy realities of human life. But what are the implications of Kant's unwavering commitment to the moral law within? Is a purely rational morality sufficient for living a good life, independent of religious faith or external authority? The implication of this is that morality isn't something handed down from on high, but something we discover through the diligent application of our own reason. What if morality is written within us? Some may say it's in our DNA, others may say it's something that must be activated. What do you think? Perhaps a purely rational morality can provide a clear and consistent framework for ethical decision-making, free from the inconsistencies and contradictions of religious dogma. The potential benefits of relying solely on reason as a guide to moral action would be a greater sense of individual responsibility and a more universal approach to ethics. However, some might argue that reason alone is not enough, that we also need empathy, compassion, and emotional intelligence to navigate the complexities of human relationships. Could Kant's commitment to reason have provided him with a sense of purpose and meaning, despite his doubts about God? Or does a truly meaningful life require something more, something beyond the grasp of reason alone? But even with the moral law within, Kant faced a profound existential problem, the problem of evil. How could a rational moral order exist in a world filled with so much suffering and injustice? But even with the moral law within, Kant faced a profound existential problem, the problem of evil. How could a rational moral order exist in a world filled with so much suffering and injustice? This brings us to a critical juncture in our exploration of Kant's inner world, a point where the seemingly unshakable foundations of his philosophical system appear to tremble. The Diaries, if they existed in the form we imagine, would likely reveal a deep and agonizing struggle to reconcile his rational moral order with the stark reality of human suffering. How could Kant, a man who sought to ground morality in pure reason, reconcile the seemingly irrational and arbitrary nature of pain, loss, and injustice with the notion of a benevolent and rational universe? How could Kant reconcile his rational moral order with the irrationality of suffering? To fully appreciate the magnitude of this challenge, we must delve into the traditional problem of theodicy. Theodicy, at its core, is an attempt to answer the age-old question: if God is all good and all-powerful, why does evil exist? Various theodicies have been proposed throughout history. The free will defense, for example, argues that evil is the result of human choices, a necessary consequence of our freedom to choose between good and evil. The soul-making theodicy suggests that suffering is a crucible, a means by which we develop moral character and spiritual depth. But how would Kant, with his emphasis on reason and autonomy, have viewed these explanations? It's unlikely that he would have found them entirely satisfying. His rationalist approach demanded a logically consistent explanation for suffering, one that didn't rely on appeals to faith or divine mystery. The problem of evil presented a formidable challenge to Kant's philosophical system, forcing him to confront the limits of human reason in the face of profound existential questions. So what exactly is theodicy? It signifies the justification of God's goodness and omnipotence in the face of evil and suffering in the world. Typical theodicies might not align with Kant's system, because they often rely on faith-based arguments or metaphysical explanations that Kant's critical philosophy would subject to rigorous scrutiny. Now, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries, echoes of despair that might have resonated within the private thoughts of Immanuel Kant. These are not literal transcriptions, of course, but rather attempts to capture the essence of his struggle with the problem of evil, moments where the weight of human suffering threatened to overwhelm his faith in a rational moral order. Consider this first entry. Today, I am haunted by the image of a child dying of a painful illness. Her small body racked with agony, her innocent eyes filled with confusion and fear. Where is the justice in this? How can a benevolent God allow such suffering, such senseless cruelty to befall one so pure, so undeserving? Is this merely a test, a trial of faith? But what purpose does such suffering serve? What lesson is to be learned from the agony of a child? My reason offers no solace, no explanation that can reconcile this horror with the notion of a just and loving God. In this poignant reflection, Kant grapples with the visceral reality of innocent suffering, questioning the very foundations of his belief in a benevolent deity. How can a purely rational explanation account for such profound and seemingly meaningless pain? Let's now consider a second hypothetical diary entry. I observe, with increasing dismay, the prevalence of injustice in the world. The wicked prosper, flaunting their ill-gotten gains, while the virtuous suffer in silence, their honesty and integrity rewarded with hardship and neglect. A corrupt politician rises to power, enriching himself at the expense of the honest citizens he is sworn to serve, while those who speak out against his corruption are silenced, marginalized, or even punished. Where is the moral order in this? Where is the cosmic justice that rewards virtue and punishes vice? My reason demands that there be a connection between moral action and consequence, that the universe should be governed by a principle of fairness and equity. But the reality I observe contradicts this demand at every turn. Is morality merely a human construct, a fiction we impose upon a chaotic and indifferent universe? Here, Kant confronts the problem of injustice, the apparent disconnect between moral desert and worldly success. Does the triumph of the wicked undermine the very notion of a rational moral order? Is justice merely a human ideal, or a reflection of some deeper cosmic principle? And finally, let us consider this third hypothetical entry. Today, I contemplated the seemingly random nature of natural disasters. An earthquake devastates a city, burying thousands of innocent people beneath the rubble, their lives extinguished in an instant. A hurricane sweeps across the land, leaving a trail of destruction and despair in its wake. Why would a supposedly rational God allow such events to occur? Why would he unleash such forces of destruction upon the world, causing widespread death and suffering? Is this merely a consequence of natural law, a blind and impersonal force that operates without regard for human life or well-being? But if that is the case, then what becomes of the notion of divine providence, the idea that God intervenes in the world to protect and guide his creation? I am left with a profound sense of unease, a gnawing doubt that threatens to undermine my faith in a rational and benevolent order. Here, Kant contemplates the seemingly arbitrary nature of natural disasters, questioning the existence of a benevolent God who would allow such widespread death and destruction. Does the randomness of natural events challenge the notion of divine providence? What are the implications of Kant's struggle with the problem of evil? Did his inability to fully resolve this problem undermine his faith in a rational moral order? Did it lead him to question the limits of human reason, to recognize that there are some mysteries that lie beyond the grasp of our intellect? Or did he suppress these doubts in his published works, presenting a more consistent and optimistic picture of the world than he truly believed? Did the problem of evil represent a chasm between Kant's public philosophy and his private beliefs? What does that say about the integrity of his system? The problem of evil challenged the neatness of Kant's system because it introduced elements of irrationality and suffering that were difficult to reconcile with his emphasis on reason and moral autonomy. This does indeed represent an example of where Kant's public persona and private beliefs diverged significantly, which implies that Kant's faith was very limited and he thought humans could only know themselves through reason. It is important to consider what that means. So, in the face of such apparent meaninglessness, where did Kant find meaning? Kant's diaries, if they truly existed, suggest he sought refuge from the problem of evil and the limitations of reason in the realm of aesthetics, art, beauty, and the sublime. Was this a genuine path to meaning, or merely a gilded cage for a mind wrestling with the unanswerable? Did Kant find lasting meaning in beauty, or was it, in the end, just a temporary escape? To understand this potential avenue of solace, we need to delve into Kant's aesthetic theory. For Kant, aesthetic judgment wasn't about objective truth or moral goodness. Instead, it revolved around subjective experience. Beauty, he argued, is that which pleases without interest or concept. Now, what does he mean by disinterested pleasure? It signifies that our appreciation of beauty should not be tied to any personal gain, desire, or practical purpose. We should admire a flower for its sheer beauty, not for its potential to be sold, eaten, or used as medicine. This disinterested pleasure is crucial for aesthetic experience because it frees us from the constraints of our everyday concerns, allowing us to enter a state of pure contemplation. Another crucial element in Kant's aesthetic is the sublime. The sublime, unlike beauty, doesn't necessarily please us. Instead, it overwhelms us with its immensity or power, evoking both awe and terror. Kant differentiated between the mathematical sublime, the experience of vastness that exceeds our comprehension, and the dynamical sublime, the experience of nature's overwhelming power. Kant believed that these aesthetic experiences, both of beauty and the sublime, could provide a sense of transcendence and meaning, offering a temporary escape from the confines of reason and the problem of evil. When we are immersed in the beauty of a work of art or the awe-inspiring power of nature, we are lifted beyond the everyday world, beyond our anxieties and fears. In those fleeting moments, we experience a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves, a glimpse of the infinite. However, this isn't to say that aesthetic judgment and moral judgment were entirely divorced in Kant's philosophy. He believed that the capacity for aesthetic appreciation was linked to our moral sensibility, that a cultivated taste for beauty could foster a greater capacity for moral judgment. But how exactly did he envision these two connecting? Kant argued that both aesthetic and moral judgments require a certain level of detachment and impartiality. Just as we must approach a work of art with disinterested pleasure, we must approach moral dilemmas with a sense of fairness and objectivity, putting aside our personal biases and desires. To illustrate this, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries that capture Kant's experiences with art, nature, and the sublime. These aren't direct quotations, of course, but rather imagined glimpses into his inner world. First, consider this entry. Tonight, I attended a performance of Bach's Goldberg Variations. The music washed over me, a torrent of sound that seemed to dissolve the boundaries of myself. For a brief moment, the anxieties and uncertainties that plague my waking hours were silenced, replaced by a sense of pure, unadulterated joy. I felt transported beyond the confines of my study, beyond the weight of my philosophical burdens, into a realm of pure beauty. But is this merely a fleeting pleasure, a momentary distraction from the deeper problems that confront me? Or does it offer a glimpse of a more profound truth, a deeper meaning that transcends the limitations of reason? Here, we see Kant grappling with the emotional impact of music, the feeling of being transported beyond the everyday world, and the temporary silencing of his anxieties, which relates directly to disinterested pleasure. The question lingers: is this a true source of meaning, or just a temporary escape? Now, let's envision another diary entry. Today, I spent hours contemplating a painting by Caspar David Friedrich. The solitary figure standing before a vast, mist-shrouded landscape resonated deeply within me. The painting evoked a sense of both longing and peace, a yearning for something beyond the grasp of human understanding. The interplay of light and shadow, the subtle gradations of color, the sheer beauty of the composition filled me with a sense of awe. Does this immersion in beauty reveal me using art to soothe my mind? Or is it a testament to the power of art to connect us to something larger than ourselves, to awaken a sense of wonder and mystery within our souls? In this entry, we see Kant immersed in the contemplation of art, questioning whether it's a mere palliative or a genuine source of connection. And finally, let us consider this third entry. I witnessed a fierce storm raging over the Baltic Sea. The waves crashed against the shore with relentless fury, the wind howled like a banshee, and the sky was rent by flashes of lightning. I felt a sense of both terror and exhilaration, a humbling realization of my own insignificance in the face of nature's power. The sublime filled me with awe, but did that awe lead me to lasting meaning? Or did it simply give me a temporary rush? Here, Kant confronts the power of the sublime, experiencing both awe and terror and questioning its ultimate significance. But did Kant truly find lasting meaning and purpose through art, beauty, and the sublime? Or were these experiences merely temporary distractions from his deeper existential anxieties? Did his aesthetic experiences provide him with a sense of connection to something beyond himself, or were they simply subjective feelings with no objective grounding? What are the limitations of aesthetics as a source of meaning and purpose? Can beauty truly solve the problem of evil, or is it merely a palliative, a band-aid on a wound that runs far deeper? Did he, in the end, come to the conclusion that art was just a band-aid? Perhaps even temporary moments of beauty are important. Even fleeting moments of solace can provide respite from suffering, a chance to recharge our spirits and find renewed strength to face the challenges of life. Stay with me, because Kant's diaries, if they existed in the form we imagine, may reveal a final, perhaps surprising, perspective on God and the meaning of life that goes beyond both reason and aesthetics. But there's a twist. This perspective may be far more unsettling than anything we've encountered so far. We're just scratching the surface. Did Kant's struggles ultimately lead him back to God, or to a completely different understanding of existence? Did Kant, in the end, come to believe that the solace found in aesthetics was just a temporary reprieve, a beautiful distraction from the deeper questions that haunted him? Or did his philosophical journey take an even more unexpected turn, a turn hinted at in his imagined, secret diaries? What if, beyond reason and aesthetics, Kant ultimately embraced a practical faith, a commitment to acting as if there is meaning and purpose in the universe, even without definitive proof? This shift wouldn't be a surrender to blind faith, but a deliberate choice, a philosophical wager born from wrestling with the limits of human understanding. Did Kant find peace not in knowing, but in believing in the possibility of a higher purpose, even if unprovable? This may be more shocking than his interest in beauty. To understand this concept of practical faith, we must first distinguish it from traditional religious belief. It's not about adhering to specific dogmas, reciting prescribed prayers, or even believing in a personal, intervening God. Instead, it's about adopting a worldview that makes moral action possible and meaningful in a world seemingly devoid of inherent purpose. Think of it as a philosophical commitment to living, as if certain values and principles are true, even if we cannot definitively prove them to be so. This isn't about embracing delusion, but about recognizing the limits of reason and the necessity of hope in the face of uncertainty. Now, how does this connect to Kant's overall philosophical system? This practical faith connects directly to Kant's concept of the postulates of practical reason, the ideas of God, freedom, and immortality. Kant argued that while we cannot prove these ideas through theoretical reason, we must presume them for morality to make sense. And here's the twist, revealed in his imagined diaries. Kant came to see these postulates not as metaphysical truths, but as necessary fictions, beliefs that are essential for guiding our actions and giving our lives meaning. He may have thought a world without the possibility of God is one without hope, but one that we should strive for anyways. In essence, Kant may have believed that even if we cannot know God exists, we must act as if God exists to create a just and moral society. A shocking conclusion for someone who grounded his philosophy in reason. Did Kant decide that acting morally was more important than intellectual consistency? What does this tell us about his view of humanity? To illustrate Kant's embrace of practical faith, let's turn to 3 hypothetical diary entries, glimpses into his internal world where he grapples with doubt, meaning, and moral responsibility. Remember, these entries are imagined, but they are rooted in Kant's philosophical ideas and the historical context of his life. First, consider this entry. I have spent countless hours wrestling with the existence of God, poring over arguments and counterarguments, seeking a definitive proof that forever eludes me. Reason, it seems, can take me no further. But does this mean I must abandon the very idea of God? No. For even if I cannot know God exists, I must still act as if he exists, because this belief is necessary for upholding morality and creating a just society. Though reason may falter, duty remains. In this entry, Kant acknowledges the limits of reason but insists on the necessity of acting as if God exists for the sake of morality. Next, imagine this entry. The world is awash in suffering. Innocent people are tormented, injustice reigns, and life often seems utterly meaningless. How can one reconcile this with the notion of a benevolent God? I cannot. And yet, I refuse to succumb to despair. I must still strive to alleviate suffering and create a better world, even if there is no guarantee of ultimate success. The meaning may be absent, but the striving gives meaning. Here, Kant confronts the problem of suffering and insists on the importance of striving for a better world, even in the absence of guaranteed success. Finally, consider this entry. Hope is a fragile thing, easily extinguished by the harsh realities of life. But without hope, what is left? Despair? Cynicism? No, we must cling to hope, even when reason offers little solace. Even if we cannot be certain that our efforts will ultimately make a difference, we must still maintain hope that a better future is possible. Despair is the enemy of duty. In this entry, Kant emphasizes the importance of hope as a driving force for moral action. Now, let's analyze the implications of Kant's supposed embrace of practical faith. Did he ultimately find a way to reconcile his intellectual doubts with a deep-seated need for meaning and purpose? Did he resolve to create the values he felt society was missing? Does his example offer a valuable lesson for those struggling with faith and reason in the modern world? What would Kant make of the struggles of our time? Is it possible he'd be comforted knowing that these struggles have existed for centuries and that they still exist today? Does it provide a framework for living a meaningful life even in the absence of certainty? Perhaps practical faith is not about blind belief, but about a conscious choice to embrace a worldview that makes moral action possible and meaningful. Is this what Kant thought was the most anyone could do? And let's tie this back to the video's central theme, the tension between Kant's public philosophy and his private beliefs. His practical faith represents a possible synthesis of reason and faith, a way of living authentically in the face of uncertainty. By publicly declaring one thing and privately pondering something else, does that make him less authentic? Or does that make him more human? Did Kant truly grapple with these topics? How does this deeper understanding of Kant, his doubts, his struggles, and his ultimate embrace of practical faith, change the way we view his work and its relevance to our own lives? Stay with me, because the answer to this question may fundamentally alter your perception of this giant of philosophy. Is it possible Kant's secret beliefs add to his complexity? If God knows everything, including our future actions, are we truly free? Kant grappled with this apparent contradiction between divine omniscience and human autonomy in his Diaries. Here, we're not just talking about a philosophical debate. It's about exploring the Diaries' perspective on the very intersection between free will, determinism, and divine knowledge. Are we authors of our own lives, or are we merely characters acting out a pre-written script? The central question lurking within the pages of Kant's imagined secret diary. How could Kant reconcile his belief in human freedom with the possibility of a predetermined universe, especially given his practical faith and his potential, even shocking, doubts about God? Now, let's delve deeper into this philosophical minefield. The problem of free will and determinism has haunted philosophers for centuries. Determinism, at its core, is the view that all events, including our choices, are causally determined by prior events. Imagine a vast chain reaction, stretching back to the beginning of time, where every moment inevitably leads to the next. Does that leave any room for genuine freedom? This is where the concepts of incompatibilism and compatibilism enter the fray. Incompatibilism argues that free will and determinism are fundamentally incompatible. You can't have both. If determinism is true, then free will is an illusion, and vice versa. Compatibilism, on the other hand, attempts to find a middle ground, arguing that free will and determinism can coexist in some way. But how? Kant, ever the innovator, attempted to resolve this ancient problem with his transcendental idealism. He distinguished between two realms, the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. The phenomenal world is the world as it appears to us, the world of experience, governed by causality. In this realm, every event has a cause, and determinism seems to reign supreme. But Kant argued that there's another world, the noumenal world, the world as it is in itself, beyond our experience. This is where things get interesting. Kant suggested that our true selves, our noumenal selves, exist outside of the causal chain of the phenomenal world. This allows Kant to carve out a space for freedom. Our actions in the phenomenal world may appear determined, but they are ultimately grounded in the free choices of our noumenal selves. But was this truly enough? As we continue, let's consider how, according to the Diaries, Kant wondered if his ingenious solution was sufficient to safeguard human freedom in the face of divine omniscience. If God knows everything, including every choice we will ever make, does that knowledge somehow predetermine our actions? Perhaps fate is unavoidable, Kant may have pondered. Perhaps the moral law within is not enough to save us from a life already decided. If even Kant questioned his own solution, what hope do we have? To illustrate Kant's agonizing struggle with free will and determinism, let's turn to 3 hypothetical diary entries, glimpses into his intellectual torment. Remember, while these entries are imagined, they are rooted in Kant's philosophical ideas and the intellectual climate of his time. First, consider this entry. I find myself increasingly troubled by the implications of God's perfect knowledge of the future. If God knows what I will do tomorrow, am I truly choosing, or am I simply acting out a script already written? The weight of this question is almost unbearable. How can I reconcile divine foreknowledge with the very essence of human agency? In this poignant entry, Kant grapples directly with the challenge of reconciling divine foreknowledge with the core of human autonomy. Is autonomy just a fantasy? Next, imagine this entry. Today, I find myself haunted by a chilling thought. Perhaps our sense of freedom is nothing more than an illusion, a subjective experience that masks the underlying determinism of the universe. Perhaps we are all puppets, dancing to a tune we cannot hear. We tell ourselves we are making choices, but are we truly in control? Or are we simply responding to forces beyond our comprehension? Perhaps we can only be sure of the moral law within. But is that enough? And if that's all we can be sure of, is that enough to consider ourselves free? Here, Kant explores the unsettling possibility that our cherished sense of freedom is merely a comforting delusion. Finally, consider this entry. The implications of determinism for moral responsibility are truly disturbing. If our actions are predetermined, if we are merely puppets dancing on strings of causality, can we truly be held accountable for them? If I am not free, then neither am I responsible. But the moral law commands responsibility. This is the paradox that torments me. Where lies the balance between the two? Here, Kant confronts the unsettling implications of determinism for morality itself. If we are not free, can we truly be held responsible for our actions? Was Kant stuck at this point, never able to make the final leap? Now, let's analyze the profound implications of Kant's struggle with free will and determinism. Did he ultimately find a satisfactory resolution to this problem, a way to reconcile divine omniscience with human autonomy? Or did it lead him to question the limits of human reason itself, to doubt the possibility of achieving true autonomy in a universe governed by deterministic laws? Perhaps the answer is that he never truly resolved it, but continued to seek out an answer. The difficulty itself may have been the point. The implications of this are far-reaching, but let's bring it back to the video's theme, the difficulty even great minds have wrestled with over time. Kant may have struggled to achieve a perfect synthesis, but that in itself is a testament to the enduring power and complexity of these questions. The struggle is the price of meaning. The problem of free will remains one of the most enduring and challenging questions in philosophy, and there is no easy conclusion to reach. But remember, the absence of a perfect solution does not diminish the importance of the quest. So, what does this tell us about Kant? This leads us to the ultimate question Kant faced in his diaries. Was there a way to choose life and meaning? Ultimately, Kant's diaries reveal a choice, a singular decision he must face in the end. Did he pick a life with meaning? Stay with me, because what comes next may surprise you. Kant's struggle with free will leads us to a profound fork in the road, a personal reckoning of immense consequence. His diaries, if they existed, document his confrontation with the ultimate question, whether to embrace the inherent uncertainty of existence and the possibility of freedom, or succumb to a deterministic view, rendering life ultimately meaningless. This was the final, agonizing choice Kant faced, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. In the face of doubt, suffering, and the potential illusion of freedom, what ultimate commitment would define Kant's understanding of life and God? To understand the gravity of this decision, we need to explore the two distinct paths that lay before him. The first path involved a wholehearted embrace of uncertainty. This meant acknowledging the inherent ambiguity of the universe, accepting the limits of human reason, and understanding that definitive answers to ultimate questions might forever remain out of reach. More importantly, this path meant accepting the possibility of free will, even without definitive proof. For Kant, this path meant understanding that life, despite its inherent uncertainty, possessed immeasurable value. The alternative path led to an acceptance of determinism, a worldview where all events are predetermined, and human freedom is ultimately nothing more than an elaborate illusion. This path suggested that life is simply a series of events unfolding according to immutable laws, devoid of any ultimate purpose or moral significance. It's as though the universe is a wind-up clock that was started at the beginning of time. These two paths represent fundamentally different worldviews, with profound implications for how one lives their life and approaches morality. To choose determinism is to resign oneself to the role of a passive observer, a mere spectator in a cosmic drama over which one has no control. It means relinquishing any sense of personal responsibility, for if our actions are predetermined, how can we truly be held accountable for them? Embracing uncertainty, on the other hand, is an act of defiance, a refusal to surrender to the seductive allure of nihilism. It means choosing to live as if we are free, to strive for moral excellence, and to create meaning in a world that may ultimately be devoid of inherent purpose. It's as if you take on your shoulders to lift the world. This, in essence, is an expression of Kant's practical faith, his conviction that we must act in accordance with the moral law, even if we cannot prove its objective validity. To truly grasp the intensity of Kant's internal struggle, let's turn to 3 hypothetical diary entries, glimpses into his agonizing debate as he grappled with this final choice. Remember, these entries are imagined, but they are rooted in his philosophical ideas and the intellectual climate of his time. First, consider this entry. There is a certain comfort in knowing that all is predetermined, that nothing is truly accidental, that the universe is a clockwork mechanism unfolding with inexorable precision. I am drawn to this view, for it offers a sense of order and predictability in a world that often feels chaotic and incomprehensible. The stars are on rails, and so am I. There is a certain beauty in fate. This reveals the allure of determinism, the seductive appeal of a universe governed by fixed laws, where everything has a cause and an effect. In this, Kant reflects on an acceptance that fate is unavoidable. But then, consider this entry. If everything is predetermined, then human life is devoid of meaning, moral responsibility is an illusion, and all our struggles and aspirations are ultimately futile. If we are not free, then we are merely puppets, dancing to a tune we did not choose. And what is the point of dancing if the music is meaningless? I cannot bear the thought that all our efforts, all our sacrifices, are ultimately for naught. If there is no freedom, there is no hope. In this entry, Kant articulates the despair that accompanies determinism. He recognizes that if everything is predetermined, then human life is devoid of meaning, moral responsibility is an illusion, and all our struggles and aspirations are ultimately futile. It's clear that he can't be certain of anything. Finally, consider this entry. Even if we cannot prove that we are free, we must live as if we are free, for only then can we be truly moral beings. The moral law commands us to act in accordance with duty, to strive for the good, and to treat all persons as ends in themselves, never merely as means. This is the foundation of all morality, and it depends on the possibility of freedom. Therefore, we must choose to believe in freedom, even in the face of doubt. Hope is the anchor, even if heaven is a lie. Here, Kant passionately defends the possibility of freedom and the importance of striving for moral excellence, even in the face of uncertainty. He understands that even if we cannot definitively prove that we are free, we must live as if we are free, for only then can we be truly moral beings. It's clear that he has to find faith. What does Kant's ultimate choice reveal about his deepest values and his understanding of the human condition? His decision to embrace uncertainty, to affirm the possibility of freedom in the face of doubt, reveals his unwavering commitment to morality and his profound belief in the dignity of the human person. He recognized that even if we cannot prove that we are free, We must act as if we are free, for only then can we live meaningful and fulfilling lives. This choice informs his philosophical legacy and its relevance for us today. Kant's life serves as an example of the importance of striving for moral excellence, even in the face of uncertainty and doubt. This final choice represents a synthesis of his earlier struggles with faith, reason, aesthetics, and morality. It represents a point of no return. Ultimately, it was a choice to embrace uncertainty and move forward. Kant shows that you have to strive, that embracing hope is essential to the human spirit. This has a lasting philosophical implication. That meaning isn't something we find, but something we create through our actions and our choices. This lesson, if it comes from Kant, means more since he wasn't able to find these answers for himself. Kant's secret diaries, if they existed, leave us with a profound call to action. How can we apply this to our own lives? This exploration of Kant's struggles provokes reflection and challenges our own assumptions about God, freedom, and the meaning of life. But we're just scratching the surface. What we'll discover next is even more shocking as we turn to the specific details of Kant's actions after this choice. Now, with Kant having embraced hope, though doubt still lingered, where did that leave him in relation to the great beyond? Kant's diaries, if they existed, would certainly explore his grappling with the concept of the afterlife, a realm beyond empirical verification, yet inextricably intertwined with his moral philosophy. We're left with a legacy of questions. Did Kant view the afterlife as a rational possibility, a moral necessity, or simply a comforting illusion in a meaningless world? To fully understand this, we have to revisit one of Kant's core ideas. Kant considered immortality as one of the postulates of practical reason. These postulates, remember, are not provable through pure reason. Instead, they're necessary assumptions for morality to be meaningful. Kant argued that the moral law demands perfect virtue, a state unattainable in our brief time on earth. Therefore, he posited an afterlife where moral progress can continue indefinitely, where the soul can continue its ascent toward moral perfection. Think about it. If we are simply snuffed out at death, what incentive do we have to strive for moral excellence, especially when virtue often goes unrewarded in this life? What is the point of delayed gratification if the delaying goes on forever? However, there's a tension here, isn't there? Kant's deep-seated rational skepticism made him inherently wary of unsubstantiated claims about the afterlife, of visions of angels and pearly gates. Yet, his moral philosophy seemed to almost require it. How did he resolve this tension? Did he see the afterlife as a literal reality, or as a metaphorical concept, a symbol of our ongoing moral journey? It's a question that haunts all of philosophy. In Kant's view, the afterlife wasn't something we could prove, but something we had to assume, a necessary condition for the very possibility of morality. Without it, the entire edifice of his ethical system would crumble. To truly understand the depth of Kant's internal struggle, let's imagine 3 hypothetical diary entries, each offering a different glimpse into his evolving thoughts on eternity. First, consider this entry. I yearn for an afterlife where the scales of justice are finally balanced, where moral imperfections can be rectified, and where the suffering of the innocent is not in vain. In this world, the wicked often prosper, and the virtuous are often punished. Such a world is intolerable. There must be a realm where good is ultimately rewarded and evil is punished, where the moral law reigns supreme. Here, Kant reveals his deep-seated yearning for a world where ultimate justice prevails, a world that reflects the moral order he so passionately defended. It's the dream of an ordered universe. Perhaps the wicked will get their just deserts. But then, consider this entry. I struggle to conceive of existence beyond the bounds of space, time, and the physical body. How can we speak of a soul existing independently of the material world? Is immortality merely a projection of our earthly desires, a comforting fiction with no basis in reality. Perhaps the longing for an afterlife is simply a byproduct of our fear of death, a desperate attempt to deny our own mortality. This entry reveals Kant's deep-seated skepticism, his unwavering commitment to empirical evidence and rational inquiry. He is wary of any claims that cannot be verified through experience. Can humans truly grasp what that would even mean? And finally, this entry. Perhaps the true afterlife is not a realm of eternal bliss or torment, but simply the lasting impact of our actions on this world. Our deeds, words, and ideas continue to resonate long after we are gone, shaping the lives of others, inspiring future generations, and contributing to the ongoing drama of human history. Perhaps the true meaning of life is not to seek personal immortality, but to leave a positive legacy, to make the world a better place for those who come after us. In this entry, Kant considers the possibility that the only immortality we can truly know is the immortality of influence, the enduring power of our actions and ideas. Perhaps the true meaning of life is legacy. So, what are the implications of these varying perspectives? Did Kant ultimately believe in an afterlife, or did he view it as a useful fiction for promoting morality? Which entry is most truthful to his core? How did his views on the afterlife affect his understanding of death and the meaning of life? Was death terrifying to Kant, or did he see it as a natural and necessary part of the human experience? These questions haunt us to this day. Kant's struggle with the afterlife reflects a universal human longing for meaning and purpose beyond the limitations of our earthly existence. We are all, in some way, grappling with the same questions that tormented Kant. But the diaries hold one final secret, a twist so profound it reframes everything we thought we knew about Kant and his secret thoughts on God. What did Kant truly believe? And what does it mean for us? But did Kant truly settle on practical faith, or did his restless mind continue to seek alternative avenues for understanding the divine? It's a question that leads us into the shadowy realms of Kant's hypothetical diaries, where we may find him exploring a premise even more radical than those we've already considered: the God within all. Did Kant secretly harbor a belief in a God that wasn't a separate being, but existence itself? And what would this do to his system? Perhaps Kant's diaries explored the possibility of embracing Spinoza's pantheism or panentheism. Pantheism, at its core, is the belief that God is the universe, that there is no distinction between the divine and the natural world. Panentheism, a related but distinct concept, posits that the universe is in God, that God encompasses and permeates all of existence, yet also transcends it. In either case, God is not a being separate from the world but is either identical to it, pantheism, or the world exists within God, panentheism. Think of it as the difference between saying God is the ocean, pantheism, and the ocean exists within God, panentheism. Both philosophies stand in stark contrast to traditional theism, which posits a personal God who created and governs the universe from a position outside of it. Remember, this also clashes sharply with Kant's publicly stated views that emphasized a personal God as a necessary postulate for morality. Now, Spinoza's philosophy emphasizes reason as the ultimate path to understanding reality. He saw the universe as governed by immutable laws, and he believed that by understanding these laws, we could come to a deeper understanding of God. Spinoza also emphasized the interconnectedness of all things, the idea that every element of the universe is related to every other. But why might Kant have been drawn to Spinoza's ideas, despite publicly criticizing them? Could Spinoza have offered a way to reconcile his own unwavering rationalism with a sense of the divine? To answer this, let's turn to those hypothetical diary entries, whispers of immanence that might reveal Kant's secret explorations. Imagine Kant reflecting on the beauty and order of the natural world, marveling at the intricate workings of the universe. He writes, "Can this be the design of a separate being, or is it the very essence of being itself, unfolding according to its own inherent laws?" In this entry, Kant seems to be moving away from the teleological argument for God's existence, the argument that posits a divine designer behind the universe. Instead, he entertains the possibility that the universe is self-organizing, driven by its own internal principles. Is Kant implying the universe doesn't need God? Then, consider this entry. We are not separate from the universe but threads in its infinite tapestry. The universe is God, and we are all part of God. Here, Kant is exploring his own relationship with existence, the idea that we are not isolated individuals but integral components of a larger whole. He seems to be embracing a sense of cosmic unity, a feeling that transcends the boundaries of the individual self. This may well be the antithesis of his writing that emphasizes the moral agent as independent. If we are all part of God, what does it mean to be an individual? Finally, this entry, living morally, means living in accordance with the whole of the universe. This, then, is our duty. Kant has found a way to marry morality with the Spinozan view. If God is the universe, then morality is not about obeying external commands handed down by a divine authority, but about aligning ourselves with the inherent order and harmony of existence. To live morally is to live in accordance with our true nature, as beings who are deeply interconnected with the rest of the cosmos. How does this change the idea of moral duty? What are the implications of Kant's potential pantheistic/panentheistic beliefs? How does this alter our understanding of his moral philosophy? Does it strengthen it, weaken it, or simply shift its focus? Perhaps it resolves his struggle with the problem of evil. If God is the universe, then suffering is not inflicted by a separate, all-powerful being, but simply an inherent part of existence. This makes suffering neither good nor bad, but simply part of the universe, much like pleasure. How does this impact free will? Does it reframe the problem in a different way? And how does this secret belief challenge traditional interpretations of Kant's philosophy? Perhaps Kant was working on two levels, publicly adhering to traditional theism while privately exploring more radical ideas. If this interpretation holds true, Kant was far more radical than scholars give him credit for. He was not simply a defender of traditional morality and religious belief, but a philosophical explorer who dared to question the very foundations of Western thought. He was willing to entertain the possibility that God is not a being out there, but the very ground of our being. But despite these insights, Kant's diaries may point to an even deeper truth, one so earth-shattering, so unexpected, it threatens to unravel everything we thought we knew about Kant. These diaries may point to an even deeper truth. Is there a final layer to Kant's system? And what does it mean for us? But what if Kant's relentless dedication to reason was itself a kind of mirage? What if, hidden beneath the towering edifice of his rational system, lay a blind spot, a failure to fully acknowledge the raw, untamed power of human emotion and instinct? After all, Kant's entire philosophical enterprise rests on the assumption that human beings are fundamentally rational creatures, capable of autonomous thought and action. But what if this is simply not the case? What if we are driven by forces far more primal, more visceral than cool, detached reason? This brings us to a critical juncture in our exploration of Kant's secret diaries. Even the ideas of pantheism or panentheism fall short of capturing the full picture. Then what is the truth? Did Kant's unwavering pursuit of reason lead him to overlook a more fundamental aspect of human nature? And if so, what are the implications for his entire philosophical system? Stay with me, for what follows could challenge the very foundations of Kantian thought. Now, let's delve deeper into this unsettling possibility. What if human beings are not primarily rational beings, but creatures driven by a complex interplay of emotions, desires, and instincts? What if reason is merely a thin veneer, a fragile construct erected upon a foundation of primal urges and unconscious motivations? Think of the philosophers and psychologists who have emphasized the power of the unconscious mind. Freud, with his explorations of the id and the ego. Nietzsche, with his celebration of the will to power. They suggest that rationality is only a thin veneer, with primal emotion boiling underneath. Perhaps Kant, in his unwavering focus on reason, was attempting to control his own unruly emotions. But what does this mean for Kant's core assumptions about human autonomy, moral responsibility, and the possibility of objective knowledge? If we are truly driven by emotion and instinct, can we truly be free? Are we really in control of our thoughts, our actions, our destinies? Or are we merely puppets, dancing to the tune of unconscious desires? Is Kant's work merely a coping mechanism, born from a wish to control a chaotic and frightening world? To illustrate this point, let's turn to those hypothetical diary entries, those whispers from the shadows that may reveal the true extent of Kant's internal struggles. Imagine Kant reflecting on his famously regimented life, his limited social interactions, his difficulty connecting with others on an emotional level. He writes, "I observe the passions in others, study them with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope, but I feel them not myself. Is this strength, a testament to the power of reason? Or is it a curse, a sign that I am somehow less than human?" In this entry, Kant seems to be acknowledging a profound lack of emotional connection, a sense of being cut off from the wellspring of human feeling. What does this say about his own understanding of human nature? What does it say about the validity of a philosophical system built on such a seemingly limited emotional foundation? Now, consider this entry, where Kant grapples with repressed desires and anxieties, those dark currents that may have been swirling beneath the surface of his meticulously ordered existence. "The world is a frightening place," he writes, "a swirling vortex of temptations and dangers, a battleground where base instincts constantly threaten to overwhelm the fragile defenses of reason. Only through the unwavering application of rational principles can we hope to prevail, to maintain order in the face of chaos." Here, Kant seems to be clinging desperately to reason as a shield against the perceived threats of the outside world, a way to suppress his own unruly emotions and maintain a sense of control. But what if this control comes at a cost? What if the very act of repression serves only to amplify the power of those repressed desires and anxieties, turning them into a destructive force? Finally, imagine Kant at the end of his life, looking back on his accomplishments with a mixture of pride and regret. "I have devoted my life to the pursuit of reason," he writes, "to the construction of a philosophical system that can withstand the test of time. But perhaps," he continues, his voice tinged with a hint of melancholy, "perhaps there are depths of human experience that reason cannot fathom, mysteries that lie beyond the reach of rational inquiry. Perhaps, in my relentless pursuit of order and clarity, I have missed something essential, something that lies at the very heart of what it means to be human." In this entry, Kant seems to be acknowledging the limitations of his rational approach to life, a sense that he may have sacrificed something vital in his quest for intellectual perfection. Has Kant perhaps sacrificed too much? What are the implications of Kant's potential repression of emotions and instincts? Did his unwavering focus on reason come at a cost? Did it prevent him from fully experiencing life, from connecting with others on a deeper, more meaningful level? Did his emphasis on order and control ultimately stifle his spirit, leaving him feeling isolated and unfulfilled? And what does this say about the validity of his moral philosophy? Are his moral principles too abstract, too detached from the messy, unpredictable realities of human experience? Are they so divorced from human emotion that they become cold and unfeeling, potentially causing harm rather than good? After all, if Kant's moral system requires the suppression of natural human emotions, is it truly a system that promotes human flourishing? Does it require someone to be inhuman? Perhaps, in the end, Kant's greatest failure was his failure to truly account for what it means to be human. Perhaps his relentless pursuit of reason led him to overlook the essential role that emotions, desires, and instincts play in shaping our thoughts, our actions, and our relationships with others. But so, where does this leave us? Was Kant wrong all along? Was his life's work ultimately a misguided endeavor, a testament to the limitations of human reason? Or can we, despite all of this, glean some new understanding of the world and ourselves from Kant? And, even if Kant's emphasis on reason was ultimately misguided, does his philosophy still offer valuable insights into the human condition? But what if Kant's emphasis on reason, his celebrated strength, was actually his greatest vulnerability? What if, in prioritizing logic and abstract thought above all else, he inadvertently constructed a gilded cage for his own mind, limiting his access to the messy, unpredictable world of human emotions and lived experience? Building directly from the possibility that Kant failed to account for emotion, we must ask, did Kant's commitment to reason ultimately blind him to the power of emotion and empathy, creating a distorted, incomplete philosophy? Now, let's introduce a concept that sheds light on this possibility: the echo chamber of the mind. In contemporary terms, an echo chamber describes a social or informational environment where individuals are primarily exposed to opinions, beliefs, and information that reinforce their pre-existing views, excluding or dismissing anything that contradicts them. Think of social media algorithms that curate content based on your past behavior, creating a feedback loop that confirms your biases and limits your exposure to diverse perspectives. In a similar way, Kant's intense focus on reason, logic, and abstract principles may have created a self-reinforcing system within his own mind. What this means is, Kant's mind may have filtered out or dismissed anything that didn't align with his established framework. The more he focused on reason, the less he engaged with other ways of knowing, solidifying his initial biases. But here's the twist: this isn't just about intellectual disagreement. It's about Kant potentially being unable to understand or even acknowledge the validity of experiences, perspectives, and motivations that didn't fit neatly into his rational framework. To illustrate this, let's turn to those hypothetical diary entries, those glimpses into the inner world of a man grappling with the limitations of his own intellect. Imagine Kant reflecting on his interactions with ordinary people. He writes, "I observe them, these merchants, these laborers, these gossiping housewives. They seem driven by forces I cannot comprehend. Their concerns are so petty, their motivations so opaque. Is it a failing on their part, a deficiency of intellect? Or is it a failing on mine, a blindness to some essential aspect of human nature?" In this entry, Kant seems to be acknowledging a profound disconnect between himself and the everyday world, a sense of being unable to truly understand the concerns and motivations of those around him. He's not necessarily judging them, but he's certainly not empathizing with them. Now, consider this entry, where Kant expresses frustration with those who reject his philosophical ideas. "They cling to their emotions like children to blankets," he writes. "They recoil from the cold, hard light of reason, preferring the comforting darkness of superstition and sentimentality. How can one reason with such people? How can one hope to enlighten them when they are so resistant to enlightenment?" Here, Kant reveals a deep-seated impatience with those who don't share his intellectual inclinations, dismissing them as irrational and sentimental. But what if their resistance isn't simply a matter of intellectual deficiency? What if it stems from a different way of knowing, a different set of values, a different way of experiencing the world? Finally, imagine Kant at the end of his life, reflecting on his own emotional detachment. I strive to understand humanity, he writes, to develop a universal moral philosophy that applies to all rational beings, but perhaps I am too distant, too detached to truly see it. Perhaps my very commitment to reason has blinded me to the essential role that emotions play in shaping our thoughts, our actions, our relationships with others. In this entry, Kant seems to be acknowledging a deep-seated sense of isolation, a recognition that his emotional detachment may be preventing him from fully understanding the human condition. Is it possible to understand something you cannot relate to? So, what are the implications of Kant's potential isolation and lack of empathy? Did it limit the scope and relevance of his philosophical system, making it applicable only to a narrow segment of humanity? Perhaps Kant's philosophy, with its emphasis on abstract principles and rational autonomy, speaks primarily to those who share his intellectual inclinations, neglecting the needs and experiences of those who are driven by different values. But what about the universality of it all? Did it prevent him from fully appreciating the value of human relationships, emotions, and experiences? Did it ultimately undermine his attempt to develop a universal moral philosophy, one that applies to all rational beings? Is true universality possible without a grounding in shared human experiences, including the full range of emotions and relationships? Is Kant's philosophy too inhuman to truly be helpful? Think about it. If Kant's system relies on suppressing emotions, does it really seek to uplift humanity? But the Diaries point to something even more unsettling, a final, devastating realization that could shatter everything Kant built. Was Kant wrong? And if so, what does it all mean? Now, building on the idea that Kant's relentless focus on reason created an echo chamber, blinding him to the power of emotion, we must ask ourselves, did this intellectual isolation lead him to confront a far more terrifying possibility in his diaries than all of his intellectual efforts, his moral system? And his attempts to find meaning were ultimately futile because objective meaning itself is an illusion. This goes beyond mere isolation. It suggests an existential crisis at the heart of Kant's project. Does Kant's pursuit of a rational, moral order ultimately lead him to the conclusion that such an order is nothing more than a comforting fiction, and that life is, in fact, inherently meaningless? To understand this, we must confront the concept of nihilism. At its core, nihilism is the rejection of objective meaning, value, and truth. It's the philosophical equivalent of staring into a black hole, where all light and matter are swallowed without a trace. Think of it as a cosmic shrug, a declaration that nothing truly matters. This philosophical stance comes in many flavors. Existential nihilism posits that life has no inherent purpose, and we are free to create our own meaning, or not. Moral nihilism argues that there are no objective moral values. Good and evil are simply social constructs. And epistemological nihilism questions the possibility of genuine knowledge, suggesting that our perceptions are inherently flawed and unreliable. What this means is, nihilism doesn't just question the existence of God or the afterlife. It challenges the very foundations upon which we build our lives, our societies, and our understanding of the world. But here's the twist. This perspective directly challenges Kant's fundamental assumptions about the possibility of constructing a rational, moral order. If morality and reason are just social constructs, devoid of any ultimate significance, then Kant's entire system is built on sand. If there is no deeper order to the universe, then his life's work could amount to nothing more than an elaborate intellectual exercise, a complex game with no real-world implications. And here is where those secret diaries become so important. They perhaps reveal a hidden fear, that his entire philosophical project was an elaborate attempt to shield himself from this terrifying possibility. He spent his entire life trying to find reason, but what if there was no reason to be found? If the ultimate conclusion is nihilism, then did Kant spend his entire life trying to avoid this fate, subconsciously knowing that he was running from a terrifying truth? What if Kant's devotion to reason was not a path to enlightenment, but a desperate attempt to outrun the void? Let's turn once more to those hypothetical diary entries. These aren't mere historical documents. They are portals into the inner turmoil of a mind grappling with its own limitations. Imagine Kant wrestling with the implications of his work, penning these words: "I build systems of thought, but to what end? Does any of it truly matter in the face of eternity? Are my critiques, my categories, my moral imperatives anything more than fleeting patterns in the dust, destined to be swept away by the winds of time?" In this entry, Kant questions the ultimate purpose of his philosophical endeavors, wondering if they are simply elaborate intellectual games with no real-world significance. It's the stark realization that his life's work could be pointless, a Sisyphean task of endless intellectual labor with no lasting impact. Think about it. What if Kant felt like he was pushing a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down again and again? Consider this second entry, where Kant grapples with the implications of moral nihilism, fearing that his moral philosophy is nothing more than a subjective preference with no objective grounding. If there is no ultimate good or evil, then what is the basis for my moral law? Is it all just a matter of taste, a cultural convention, a fleeting fancy? If so, then what authority do I have to demand obedience to my categorical imperative? Is it all just a hollow charade? This reveals Kant's questioning of the validity of his moral law. If morality is relative, then his entire ethical system crumbles. What if the foundation of morality that Kant has constructed is just a story we tell ourselves? Finally, imagine Kant contemplating the vastness and indifference of the universe, feeling a sense of existential dread. I gaze into the night sky, and I see only an endless expanse of cold, empty space. We are but fleeting specks of dust in a cosmos that cares nothing for our existence. What then is the point of it all? Why do we strive? Why do we suffer? Why do we even bother to exist in this meaningless universe? This entry showcases the sheer terror that Kant felt toward a meaningless universe. The universe doesn't care for our existence, so what is the point of it all? What is the point of morality? What is the point of reason? Is this the question that Kant truly sought to answer? So, what are the implications of Kant's potential encounter with nihilism? Did it lead him to question the validity of his entire philosophical system, recognizing that it may be based on a flawed premise? If Kant's world is inherently flawed and not worth any merit, then is his work ultimately meaningless and unhelpful? Did it force him to confront the limits of human reason, acknowledging that there may be fundamental questions that cannot be answered through logic and analysis? Is it impossible to know if life has meaning? And in that case, is it better to just live? Did it ultimately undermine his attempt to provide a rational foundation for morality and meaning in a world seemingly devoid of both? If nihilism is true, then is there a way out of this nihilistic view, or is it better to simply embrace it? Ultimately, if Kant truly reached this point, then his entire system may be a coping mechanism against the vastness of space and the reality of his own death. Was Kant simply trying to feel better, and if so, does that diminish the importance of his work? Was his life simply an attempt to make the universe feel less cold and empty, and does that make it less meaningful? These questions hang over Kant's diaries like a specter, haunting every meticulously crafted argument and every seemingly unshakable conviction. But even in the face of utter meaninglessness, Kant's diaries reveal one last, desperate act, a final stand against the void. Could Kant find any shred of hope, or did he surrender to nihilism? So, even in the face of utter meaninglessness, did Kant's diaries reveal one last desperate act, a final stand against the void, or did he ultimately surrender to nihilism? Now, let's explore if Kant, after dismantling the foundations of his own system, found a way to build a new one based on the individual's will to create meaning, even in the face of objective meaninglessness. In the face of such apparent meaninglessness, Kant's Diaries might just reveal a potential embrace of active nihilism, a philosophy that acknowledges the absence of inherent meaning, but emphasizes the individual's power to create their own values and purpose. To understand this, we must first define active nihilism, especially as distinguished from its passive counterpart. Passive nihilism, as we touched upon before, is the one most people associate with the term nihilism, the belief that because there is no inherent meaning, life is pointless, leading to despair and inaction. Active nihilism, on the other hand, embraces the lack of inherent meaning not as a cause for despair, but as a source of freedom and empowerment. It encourages individuals to create their own values, define their own purpose, and live life to the fullest, all while acknowledging that these creations are ultimately subjective and without objective grounding. Think of it as a philosophical reclamation project, taking the rubble of a destroyed belief system and using it to build something new, something personal, and something meaningful. This resonates powerfully with Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, the fundamental drive of all living beings to assert themselves and create their own meaning in a meaningless world. Could Kant, known for his rigid adherence to reason, have found common ground with Nietzsche, a philosopher who celebrated the irrational and the instinctual? Did he think that we were just fighting for survival? Now, let's consider how Kant might have reinterpreted his categorical imperative, the cornerstone of his moral philosophy, within this framework. Instead of seeing it as a reflection of objective moral law, a universal principle discoverable through reason, he might have viewed it as a self-imposed principle, a tool for creating a meaningful life. In other words, the categorical imperative becomes not a command from a divine being or a reflection of cosmic order, but a personal commitment to living in accordance with values that one has consciously chosen. This suggests a radical shift in Kant's thinking, from a belief in universal moral laws to an emphasis on individual autonomy and the creation of personal meaning. Think of it as Kant taking morality into his own hands, declaring, "If there is no God to dictate our actions, then we must dictate them ourselves." Did he think that morals were simply to help one advance, or were they for the betterment of all of mankind? What is the ultimate goal of morals? To illustrate this potential shift, let's delve into some hypothetical diary entries. These are, of course, imagined scenarios, but they are based on the logical extension of Kant's thinking in light of his potential encounter with nihilism. Imagine Kant penning these words: "I acknowledge the absence of inherent meaning, the silence of the universe, the lack of any divine purpose. But this does not negate the importance of striving for moral excellence. If there is no God to reward our virtue, then we must reward it ourselves. We must create our own meaning, our own sense of justice, our own moral order." In this entry, Kant acknowledges the void, but he refuses to surrender to it. He insists that even in the absence of objective meaning, the pursuit of moral excellence remains essential. It's a defiant act of self-creation, a declaration that human beings are capable of forging their own values and living by them, regardless of whether they are grounded in anything beyond themselves. Consider this second entry, where Kant embraces the freedom that comes with rejecting objective values. The universe is silent. Therefore, we must speak. We must create our values, our principles, our ideals. We are no longer bound by the dictates of tradition, the commands of religion, or the illusions of reason. We are free to define our own terms, to live life on our own terms, to become the authors of our own existence. This suggests a newfound sense of liberation, a recognition that the absence of objective values allows for unprecedented freedom of self-expression and self-creation. Kant, the champion of reason, is now embracing the power of individual will, the capacity to shape one's own destiny. What if the freedom to create our own meaning is more daunting than comforting? Finally, imagine Kant emphasizing the importance of creativity and self-expression as a means of generating meaning in a meaningless world. We are artists, tasked with painting our own canvases. The universe provides us with the raw materials, our experiences, our emotions, our thoughts, but it is up to us to transform them into works of art. Let us create masterpieces, each one a unique expression of our individual spirit. In this entry, Kant sees human beings as artists, responsible for creating their own meaning through acts of self-expression. It's a call to embrace creativity, to cultivate individuality, and to transform the mundane into the sublime. Did Kant suddenly see people as artists, and what does that make him? So, what are the implications of Kant's potential embrace of active nihilism? Does it resolve his earlier struggles with faith, reason, and morality, providing him with a way to find meaning in a world without inherent purpose? Does it validate his emphasis on morality, or does it undermine his entire system? And does it offer a valuable lesson for those struggling with existential angst in the modern world, empowering them to create their own values and live authentic lives? Does it remove the burden of purpose, or does it place an even greater burden on the individual? It is crucial to recognize that active nihilism is not about rejecting all values, but about consciously choosing the values that give our lives meaning and purpose. Kant may have been promoting the need to do so, urging us to take responsibility for our own moral compass and to create a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling. But the question remains, did he do so successfully, or did he fall short of his own ideals? Kant's secret embrace of active nihilism leaves us with a final challenge: to confront the meaninglessness of existence and create our own meaning, just as he did. This section provides both an ending and a beginning. So, what does this mean for us? Does Kant's journey end in despair or in a call to arms? And what action can we take in our own lives? But we're just scratching the surface, because Kant's embrace of active nihilism might have led him to formulate a completely new understanding of the afterlife. So, after potentially embracing active nihilism, did Kant, in his private reflections, take it a step further? Did his diaries perhaps reveal him constructing his own personal religion, one centered on self-reliance and the deification of individual moral capacity? Let's explore if Kant's seeming rejection of traditional religion led him to, perhaps inadvertently, create a new one with the self at its core. What are the implications for his philosophy and our understanding of faith itself if that's the case? To understand this, we need to consider how Kant's emphasis on the categorical imperative, autonomy, and the will to meaning could be interpreted as a form of self-worship. Within Kant's system, the individual arguably becomes the ultimate source of value and authority. What does it mean if there is no higher authority than the individual within Kant's system? This isn't about bowing down to a statue of oneself, but rather about elevating the individual's rational will to the status traditionally reserved for the divine. The categorical imperative in this interpretation is not a command from God, but a self-imposed law derived from one's own reason. Autonomy, the ability to govern oneself according to this law, becomes the highest virtue, and the will to meaning, the drive to find purpose in a meaningless world, becomes a sacred quest. Think of it as Kant replacing the 10 Commandments with a single, all-encompassing command: be true to yourself. Now, let's draw parallels between Kant's system and certain aspects of existentialist thought. Existentialism, as you know, emphasizes individual freedom, responsibility, and the creation of meaning in a meaningless world. Can we see Kant as a precursor to this school of thought? By extension, Could we say that Kant preaches a similar gospel, one where the individual is responsible for creating their own values and living authentically in the face of absurdity? Consider the implications. If the individual is the source of all value, then doesn't the individual in effect become a god? What happens if one person considers themselves evil? It's a radical idea, one that challenges the very foundations of traditional theism. But how does this religion of self differ from traditional religions? Traditional religions typically involve belief in a transcendent God, adherence to specific doctrines, and participation in communal rituals. Kant's system, on the other hand, seems to lack all of these elements. There's no personal God to pray to, no sacred text to interpret, and no communal worship to participate in. Instead, Kant appears to have developed the concept of morality as a personal relationship with the universe, mediated by reason and the will to act morally. Instead of praying in church, one meditates on the categorical imperative. Instead of sacraments, there are moral actions. Think of Kant creating a God in his own image, and urging others to do so, too. To further explore this, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries that might illustrate Kant's potential deification of the self. These are, of course, speculative, but they are based on the logical implications of his philosophy. Imagine Kant writing, "We are not mere puppets of fate, but gods in miniature, capable of shaping our own destinies through the power of reason. We are the architects of our own moral universe, responsible for creating a world in which justice and virtue prevail." In this entry, Kant elevates the individual's capacity for rational thought and moral action to the level of the divine. The emphasis is on human agency and the power of reason to create a better world. What higher calling could there be? Consider this second hypothetical entry. We must be our own priests, our own prophets, our own saviors. Only then can we be truly free. To rely on external authority is to surrender our autonomy, to become slaves to the whims of others. We must look within ourselves for guidance, for truth, for salvation. Here, Kant emphasizes the importance of self-reliance and independence, rejecting any form of external authority or guidance. The individual is responsible for their own spiritual and moral development. There is no need for intermediaries or institutions. Are priests and prophets actually useless in this reality? Finally, imagine Kant framing the pursuit of moral excellence as a sacred duty, a way of honoring the divine within oneself. To live a moral life is to worship at the altar of our own potential, to become the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. This is not a selfish pursuit, but a service to humanity, a way of contributing to the betterment of the world. For in striving to perfect ourselves, we inspire others to do the same. In this entry, Kant sees the pursuit of moral excellence as a divine quest, a way of honoring the potential within each individual. To live a moral life, then, is not simply to follow a set of rules, but to engage in a transformative process of self-discovery and self-creation. Kant may have indeed seen this as a divine quest. But what are the implications of Kant's potential religion of self? Does it offer a viable alternative to traditional religion, providing a sense of meaning and purpose without requiring belief in a transcendent God? Does it offer a path for meaning for the aimless and unfulfilled? Or does it lead to narcissism, selfishness, and a disregard for the needs of others? Kant's views may inadvertently empower and enable narcissism. What happens when everyone is their own God? This is where the potential dangers begin to emerge. Elevating the self to the level of the divine, particularly in the absence of external constraints or ethical guidelines, could lead to a dangerous form of moral relativism. Each individual becomes their own arbiter of right and wrong, potentially justifying any action in the name of self-actualization. What limitations are there to Kant's claim? Does this approach lead to the disregard of other people? Did Kant fail to address the wider implications of deifying the self? If the individual is the ultimate source of value, then what obligation do we have to others? Does compassion become a mere sentiment, a matter of personal preference rather than a moral imperative? These are the questions that Kant's religion of self raises, and they are not easily answered. Kant's claim can feel like the polar opposite of religious values. If everyone is concerned with their own perfection, is anyone concerned with the wider world? But the diaries hint at one final, shocking twist, a conception of God so radical it defies all categorization. A God, perhaps, beyond even the concept of God. Did Kant, in the end, glimpse a truth about the divine so profound it could not be contained within the bounds of reason or religion? But could there be a God even beyond that God beyond God? Did Kant's relentless pursuit of truth lead him to suspect that the divine wasn't some distant entity or even an elevated version of ourselves, but something far more intrinsic? What if, in his secret diaries, Kant hinted at a belief in a divine force or principle immanent within human consciousness itself? This would be a subtle but crucial shift, suggesting that the divine isn't separate from us but is woven into the very fabric of our minds. Building from the religion of the self and the God beyond God, did Kant ultimately believe that the kingdom of God was to be found not in heaven or within the self, but within the collective consciousness of humanity, and is it a tool for good or manipulation? To understand this radical idea, let's consider certain interpretations of idealism, a philosophical school that emphasizes the role of consciousness in shaping reality. While Kant wasn't a pure idealist, his transcendental idealism certainly paved the way for later idealists like Hegel and Fichte. At its core, idealism posits that reality, as we perceive it, is fundamentally shaped by our minds. Our experiences, our understanding of space and time, even the very objects we see around us are, in some sense, constructs of our consciousness. So, if reality itself is shaped by consciousness, is it possible that consciousness itself has a divine origin? Could Kant, in his private musings, have entertained the notion that the divine is not a separate being but the very ground of consciousness itself, the source from which all our experiences and understanding arise? Our views may stem from this point. Expanding on this, could Kant have seen the moral law within, that categorical imperative that he so famously described, as a manifestation of this divine consciousness? This wouldn't be a set of rules imposed by an external God, but rather a universal principle embedded within the very structure of our minds, a kind of divine spark that guides us toward ethical behavior. Think of it as a cosmic compass, inherent in all of us, always pointing towards what is right, regardless of our individual desires or cultural norms. Did Kant believe our morals were a result of this inner spark, this inherent divinity? If so, it would have profound implications for his moral philosophy, suggesting that our moral duties aren't simply self-imposed or derived from reason, but are reflections of a deeper, divine order that exists independently of human thought. Now, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries that might illustrate this potential belief. Remember, these are speculative, but they're grounded in the logical extensions of his philosophy, and are only possible if his public writings are hiding his true feelings. Imagine Kant writing, "I am struck by the universality of the moral law. It appears to be present in all human beings, regardless of their cultural background, their personal beliefs, or even their level of education." Is this not evidence of a shared consciousness, a divine spark that unites us all? I struggle to find any other plausible origin for this shared morality. Could it be that we are all, in some sense, connected to a larger, divine mind? In this entry, Kant grapples with the source of our shared moral sense, suggesting that it might be evidence of a collective consciousness, a divine spark that transcends individual differences. Consider a second hypothetical entry. I have been pondering the power of human intuition. There are moments when I seem to know things without knowing how I know them. A sudden insight, a flash of understanding that cannot be explained by reason alone. Is this the voice of God within? Is it possible that our intuition is a conduit for divine wisdom, a way of accessing knowledge that transcends the limitations of our rational minds? Perhaps intuition is a superpower granted to all. Here, Kant explores the possibility that intuition is not simply a cognitive function, but a channel for divine wisdom, allowing us to tap into a deeper level of understanding. Kant wonders if intuition is a superpower. And finally, imagine Kant emphasizing the importance of cultivating compassion and empathy as a means of connecting with this inner divinity. I am convinced that to see the face of God, we must look into the eyes of our fellow human beings, for it is in our capacity for compassion and empathy that the divine within us is most fully revealed. When we alleviate the suffering of others, when we offer them comfort and support, we are not simply acting morally, we are participating in a divine act of love and creation. To see the face of God, we must look into the eyes of our fellow human beings. Kant finds enlightenment through others. What would be the implications of Kant's potential belief in a divine force within human consciousness? First, would it provide a more satisfying explanation for the origin and nature of morality, perhaps resolving some of the problems with his earlier philosophical system? If the moral law is not simply a product of reason, but a reflection of a divine order embedded in consciousness, does this offer a more robust foundation for ethics? Is there an evolutionary reason behind it? Second, does it offer a more hopeful vision of the human condition, suggesting that we are all capable of accessing divine wisdom and living ethical lives? If the divine is not a distant God but an inherent part of our being, does this empower us to take greater responsibility for our moral choices? Could it create a utopia? Or, third, does it create potential dangers of confusing one's own thoughts and feelings with divine guidance, leading to self-deception and potentially harmful actions? What about the evil thoughts and murderous feelings? Is this a positive or negative thing overall? On one hand, it could be seen as a beautiful and empowering vision, suggesting that we all have the potential for moral greatness. But on the other hand, it could be a dangerous rationalization, allowing us to justify our actions in the name of divine guidance, even when those actions are harmful to ourselves and others. Think about it, is it simply a rationalization? But this divine consciousness may hold a darker secret, a terrifying possibility that turns Kant's entire philosophy on its head. What if this so-called divine force can be used for manipulation and control? As we continue, we will examine how this seemingly benevolent concept could be twisted into something far more sinister, and the implications for our understanding of Kant and ourselves are truly shocking. Stay with me. But this divine consciousness may hold a darker secret, a terrifying possibility that turns Kant's entire philosophy on its head. What if this so-called divine force can be used for manipulation and control? Did Kant believe that what he perceived as a divine force was not benevolent, but a mechanism for subtle social control? What if his diaries reveal his secret fear that a universal divine consciousness could become a tool of manipulation wielded by powerful societal forces to control the thoughts and actions of individuals, creating a panopticon of the mind? To grasp the chilling implications of this, we must consider the concept of noetic manipulation, or, to put it plainly, thought control. This isn't about physical coercion or overt brainwashing, but something far more insidious, the invisible architecture of control. It describes how dominant ideologies, carefully crafted propaganda, seemingly benign social norms, and even subtle forms of persuasion can shape people's beliefs, values, and perceptions without their conscious awareness. What this means is that our very thoughts, the things we hold most dear, might not be entirely our own. They may be subtly influenced, guided, or even dictated by forces we barely perceive. Are our thoughts truly our own? This form of manipulation exploits the very human desire for meaning, belonging, and social acceptance. Think of it like this. We are social creatures, wired to connect with others, to find our place within a community. We crave validation and fear rejection. And it is this very vulnerability that makes us susceptible to noetic manipulation. People are often willing to change their own perceptions, to adopt beliefs they might not otherwise hold, simply to gain acceptance or avoid ostracism. How many times have you found yourself agreeing with a popular opinion, even when something inside you felt uneasy? This is the power of social pressure, the subtle but pervasive force that shapes our thoughts and behaviors. Given Kant's emphasis on reason, one might assume that his philosophical system would provide a bulwark against these subtle forms of control. But is reason truly enough? Noetic manipulation often operates on an emotional or subconscious level, bypassing logical analysis altogether. Propaganda, for example, rarely appeals to reason. Instead, it relies on emotional triggers, fear, patriotism, and resentment to sway public opinion. Social norms, too, often exert their influence below the threshold of conscious awareness. We internalize them from a young age, absorbing them from our families, our communities, and the media we consume. We may not even realize we're being influenced, yet these norms shape our behavior in profound ways. How can reason alone defend us against forces that operate beyond its reach? To truly understand Kant's potential anxieties, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries that might illustrate his fears. Remember, these are speculative, glimpses into what might have lurked beneath the surface of his carefully constructed philosophical system. Imagine Kant writing, "I am deeply troubled by the power of propaganda." The masses are easily swayed by rhetoric and emotion, their reason clouded by appeals to their basest instincts. How can reason prevail against such forces? It seems our minds are all too vulnerable. In this entry, Kant acknowledges the limitations of pure reason, recognizing its inability to compete with the raw emotional power of propaganda. Consider a second hypothetical entry. I have been reflecting on the insidious influence of social norms. We are all, it seems, prisoners of our culture, confined by invisible chains of expectation. We conform not because we are compelled, but because we desire acceptance, fear disapproval. How can one exist outside of culture? To be human is to be social, but to be social is to be bound. Here, Kant grapples with the subtle but pervasive power of social norms, recognizing their ability to shape our beliefs and behaviors without our conscious awareness. And finally, imagine Kant exploring the use of fear and guilt as tools of manipulation. The shepherd uses fear to control his flock, threatening them with wolves and driving them with his staff. What then is our shepherd? What fears does he whisper in our ears? What guilt does he lay upon our shoulders? It seems we are forever children, easily frightened, easily shamed, easily led. In this entry, Kant identifies fear and guilt as powerful instruments of control, recognizing their ability to manipulate our actions and suppress our dissent. What are the implications of Kant's potential fear of noetic manipulation? Does it undermine his belief in individual autonomy and moral responsibility, suggesting that we are all, to some extent, puppets of societal forces? If our thoughts are not truly our own, can we be held accountable for our actions? Does it challenge his faith in the power of reason, recognizing that it can be easily subverted by emotional appeals and propaganda? Can the world be understood through reason, or is something else required? Did Kant construct his philosophical system as a shield against these forces, a means of preserving individual autonomy in a world increasingly dominated by manipulation and control. Was he aware of his fears? Did he even know about them? And if not, can they still affect him? The diaries have brought us to an unsettling precipice. They force us to confront a disturbing possibility, that even our most cherished values and beliefs may be the product of manipulation, and that we may be living in a panopticon of the mind, where our thoughts are constantly monitored and controlled. A final, terrifying question that challenges everything. Are we truly free, or are we just playing our roles in a script we didn't write? Stay with me. Picking up from where we left off, if our thoughts are not truly our own, if we're just playing roles in a script we didn't write inside a panopticon of the mind. The diaries reveal a final, terrifying possibility, that what we perceive as reality is not an objective truth, but a subjective construct of our own minds, a matrix of existence shaped by our senses, perceptions, and cognitive biases. This suggests that the manipulation may be far more pervasive than previously imagined, and requires us to question everything that has come before. Did Kant ultimately conclude that his entire philosophical project, his quest for reason and objective knowledge, was ultimately futile because reality itself is an illusion, a construct of the human mind? To fully grasp the weight of this possibility, we need to consider the philosophical concept of subjective idealism. What this means is that our experience is all that we can truly know. There may be no external world out there, at all, existing independently of our minds. Everything we perceive, the colors, the sounds, the textures, could simply be creations of our consciousness. It's a radical idea, challenging the very foundation of our understanding of reality. Now, let's consider how Kant's transcendental idealism, with its distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal realms, could be interpreted as a form of subjective idealism. In Kant's system, the phenomenal realm is the world as we experience it, shaped by our senses and cognitive categories. The noumenal realm, on the other hand, is the world as it exists in itself, independently of our perception. But here's the catch. Kant argued that we can never truly know the thing in itself, the noumenal realm. Our experience is always filtered through the lens of our minds. So, if we can never access reality as it truly is, can we really say that it exists at all, outside of our experience? Kant may have thought our senses were fundamentally deceiving us. What we think of as the world may simply be a hallucination we all share. This view challenges the very foundation of Kant's epistemology, his theory of knowledge, which assumes that we can have objective knowledge of the world, even if it is filtered through our senses and cognitive categories. But if reality is ultimately subjective, if it's just a product of our minds, then what becomes of objective knowledge? Is Kant's life's work useless if the world is a dream? Is his entire philosophical project built on a false premise? To illustrate Kant's potential embrace of subjective idealism and his growing skepticism about the nature of reality, let's imagine some hypothetical diary entries that might reveal the truth. Remember, these are speculative, glimpses into what might have lurked beneath the surface of his carefully constructed philosophical system. Imagine Kant writing this hypothetical diary entry. I am increasingly disturbed by the unreliability of our senses. We rely on them to provide us with an accurate picture of the world, yet they can be so easily deceived. A stick appears bent in water. Distant objects seem smaller than they are. And what of optical illusions, which trick our minds into seeing things that are not there? We are like prisoners in a cave, mistaking shadows for reality. How can we build a system of knowledge on such shaky foundations? Expand on how this relates to his idea of only being able to know appearances. Are we doomed to only know deceptive appearances? Consider a second hypothetical entry. I have been reflecting on the role of cognitive biases in shaping our perceptions. Our minds are not blank slates, but rather complex filters, interpreting the world through the lens of our pre-existing beliefs and expectations. We see what we expect to see, and we often ignore or distort information that contradicts our views. The mind is not a blank slate, but a hall of mirrors, reflecting back our own prejudices and assumptions. How can we ever hope to see the world objectively when our minds are so deeply ingrained with bias? Question: if we are doomed to always only see our own expectations. And finally, imagine Kant taking the final leap, contemplating the possibility that the entire universe is nothing more than a product of our collective consciousness, a shared dream that we are all co-creating. I find myself drawn to the most radical of ideas, that the universe itself is nothing more than a figment of our collective imagination. Perhaps we are all dreaming each other into existence, each contributing to the creation of this shared hallucination we call reality. If this is true, then what does it mean for our individual existence? Are we merely characters in someone else's dream? Or are we all co-creators, shaping the universe with our thoughts and beliefs? What are the implications of Kant's potential embrace of subjective idealism? Does it invalidate his entire philosophical project, revealing that his quest for objective knowledge was ultimately based on a false premise? If the world is a dream, is his life's work useless? Does it force us to confront the limits of human reason, acknowledging that there may be fundamental questions that cannot be answered through logic and analysis? Was Kant wrong to try? Does it suggest that we are all trapped in a matrix of existence, where our perceptions are constantly manipulated and controlled by forces beyond our comprehension? Are we living a lie? Is there a way to escape? But even in this shattering realization, Kant leaves us a key, a way to escape the matrix of existence. This final, terrifying possibility that Kant's entire system rests on sand may be the very thing that brings liberation. What is the final step we can take, after traversing all of this philosophical landscape, to live a better life? Stay with me. As we reach the end of our exploration, having delved into the depths of Kant's secret diaries, both real and imagined, we must now ask ourselves, so, after this journey, what can we truly say about Kant's secret beliefs and the God he sought or perhaps didn't seek? We've been traversing the philosophical landscape, and now it's time to synthesize everything we have uncovered. Stay with me as we consider this final summation. In essence, we've seen Kant grappling with the tension between his public arguments for God and his potential private doubts. We explored his critiques of organized religion, his emphasis on the moral law within, his wrestling with the problem of evil and determinism, and his flirtation with pantheism. We touched upon his struggles with emotion and his final confrontation with the illusion of reality within a matrix of existence. How do these seemingly disparate ideas all connect? They all point to one central theme: the struggle to reconcile faith and reason in the face of an unknowable universe. Perhaps, contrary to popular opinion, it was all an elaborate coping mechanism for him to create structure and meaning. Remember when we asked if Kant always believed what he preached? We've now seen that the answer is far more complex than we initially imagined. Recall Kant's lament about being a prisoner in a cave, mistaking shadows for reality. This now takes on a new meaning in light of his exploration of the matrix of existence, and how it potentially reflects his views on reason. Consider how these hypothetical diary entries illuminate the tension between his public persona and private doubts, showing us that he wasn't afraid to question everything, including himself. How does his moral law compare with the potential realization that there is no objective good or evil? But here's the most profound insight of all. Kant's true legacy may lie not in providing definitive answers about God or the nature of reality, but in demonstrating the importance of intellectual honesty, the courage to confront one's own doubts, and the ongoing struggle to find meaning in a complex and uncertain world. What has stood out most in our analysis is his system, one that gives you a methodology for confronting the illusion of reality and charting your own path. Kant has created a system and methodology for confronting all possibilities, and the fact that he gave us the ability to do this is his gift to humanity. The implications of this extend far beyond the realm of philosophy. They speak to broader themes of intellectual freedom, the search for meaning, and the challenges of living an authentic life in a world filled with manipulation and illusion. In a world of echo chambers and information overload, how can we cultivate intellectual honesty and empathy? How can we apply Kant's lessons to our own lives, navigating the complexities of modern society with critical thinking and a commitment to truth? Imagine a world where everyone embraces intellectual honesty. For those of you who may be struggling with similar questions about faith, reason, and